This video is made possible by our patrons.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Metabreakers. We're here with WargamerOnline. This is going to be a bit of a change of pace for Metabreakers, where we're going to be a little bit less focused on the off the wall stuff and a bit more just in the grimy old filth levels of the actual meta, and talking to you about that before we're back to helping you on how we're going to bust that meta wide open. So it's me, JP, and I'm joined by Luke.
Hello, guys.
And I'm Fabian.
What's up?
And they are fresh off the back of one of the probably the biggest team tournament we've had in AOS 3. Not that there've maybe been so many, but the Bloodtithe down with the LGT lads. So you can see they're both sort of trying to subtly leave the medals out of the shot. That's been more or less my life. Every morning I just wake up to a 15-minute clip of Luke revealing his medal again. But so they're just back off that. They got a well-deserved first place, and then after sort of Fabian test ran his Gargant's list, he passed it over to me, and I took it up north to a Scottish event up in Onslaught, where I snagged a first place there with them as well. So this is going to be, it's a little bit, saying that, there's a time and place for meta breaking, and there's a time and place for playing the actual meta. So it's sort of just flexing that we can do both. That's the hope. And then later in the year we do it with the other stuff. So we're going to be basically giving you a rundown of that. So before we get into the lists, Luke, why don't you just start us off with like how you felt? Because, for you, this was your first event of AOS 3. So what did it feel like getting back into the meta in the new edition?
So well, me and Fabian did quite a lot of prep before the event, just because of how the team event works at Bloodtithe. It's just you 4 players, and then there's like a whole process of like pairings and stuff before you even get into your games.
Mm-hmm.
It was live streamed by the Honest Wargamers, so you can see some of the games being played out on there, and the matchup process, you like pairing, getting all the matchups for the 4 players. So we did quite a bit of prep before. So we definitely, everybody that went there went to try and obviously win the event. So we took what we thought were the best lists at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Played through it. I took Seraphon and Fabian took the Gargants, and we played through a few lists and tweaked them as we went along before the event.
And then your other 2 lists were, you had Lumineth and...
Yeah, so Jack Armstrong took the Fox, had like 3 Foxes and 30 Sentinels in Zytrek, so a bit more like magic dominance kind of Fox list. And then Craig went for more control in Legions of the First Prince.
Yeah.
But he went double Bloodthirster, so he was kind of more trying to do a bit more damage.
Yeah, sure. So that was one of the things about the Gargant's list, and we'll get into that. But one of the things you guys had in your Gargant's list is you also had a more damage-based Gargant's list. Like a lot of the Gargants we've seen is Taker Tribe, where you're better at holding objectives and you're taking Kraken Eaters, whereas you guys had the double Gatebreaker list. So those are for people who don't know the different Gargants, they do a lot more damage, the Gatebreakers, than the other types of Gargants. So they only count as 20 instead of 30 on objectives, but they slap a lot harder. So, and I know, Fabian, you played the mirror, and you broke the Takers, breakered the Takers, as it were. So, that went well. So we'll get up the Seraphon list here, and so you can see, it's the big names from the Seraphon book, right? You've got the Slan, you've got the the battle line skinks. Gone are the days of having blocks of 40 skinks, so it's just sort of minimum battle line. 4 units of salamanders, those guys are some heavy hitters, and a Bastillodon and Geminids. So Luke, do you want to give us a rundown of how you ended up sort of coming to the salamander heavy list? Also, I'm interested to know how Geminids were.
Well, I just thought Gargants are just such a problem. We needed a few lists that could deal with them. Otherwise, you just end up throwing somebody under the bus as so, you know, like they just take the Gargant matchup. So all the other lists, this how this list works in Draxtel is the slan. The slan can go anywhere on the board and bring all its firepower with it. So it's just a list to try and do the damage. In an isolated point, but it's still not. Even when we practice with this kind of list, even with all these salamanders and the Bastillodon, it's still sometimes it's just not enough to kill these Mega Gargants. So it gives us a chance, and that's why Germanage is there as well, just to stop them, you know, doing the save stacking.
Or stopping all out defense.
To make sure the salamander's damage goes through, because sometimes they do just whiff, and then. And at that point, it's pretty much over if you don't kill a Gargant a turn in that kind of shot.
We are going to be talking about Gargants as sort of one of the big bads in the meta, but a lot of it is you got to kill the Gargants before you've run out of time, basically, to ever catch up on scoring, because they are going to be controlling those objectives. So,
and I did have 10 salamanders, but we just found as having the Bastillodon there just to do the battle tactics, you know, like the easier ones, and having a teleporting monster is pretty handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Kill a battle line with a monster, kill a monster with a monster, etc. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Is there anything you'd change about the list if you were going, if you were going to play Bloodtithe again? Anything you'd change?
Yeah, I changed Luke. But, that's what I'm saying. But yeah. Anyway,
we go through.
What you say, mate?
We go through what I played. I played Peter from Poland. He had 45 Bloodstalkers.
Yeah, both snakes.
That was a pretty difficult game because all the negative to hits, but so I had to take the turn, and I just did enough damage. He kept like putting my salamanders down to like one salamander, but because the way that rally works, I was just able to keep regenerating my salamanders, so my army wasn't really dying, and so it was just. He was always keeping up with battle tactics, so the score was always even. But I just slowly like tabled him in the end. So I just won that game. Round 2, I played Lumineth. Yeah, just like a standard Lumineth build with a fox and sentinels and stuff. But in that one, the slan just went crazy and did loads of mortal wounds with the temple as well. They did like 16 mortal wounds in 2 turns just with the slan. And the temple. So. That only lasted 2 turns, and then I played on stream against Lumineth again. But it was just like the way the list works, just dropping down. If he gets the double, it's pretty much over. But I didn't really get the double. You got Adam Mumford on the stream going, "Oh, look, he's just dropped down. He's going for the double," and I never got the double. So I had to always play the long game. But the salamanders are still quite tanky. They're like 12 with 4-up save. So.
And are you taking -1 damage in Dracothian's Tale?
No,
that's the other one. That's the other one. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I did lose to Toby. I did lose to Toby's legions. He didn't really kill much of my army. It's just that trying to shift legions off objectives is very difficult.
Yep, especially if they're making their summoning rolls.
He got me on that, and then I beat the Seraphon Mirror. He had it wasn't the same list. He was the -1 damage version. He had Croak, kind of different list.
I don't think the Toby loss was necessarily your fault though. I think
it was his fault.
No, I think we just got the matchup wrong. That's all. Like we thought it was a good matchup. Honestly, we did. Like when we were talking about it like beforehand, we were like, "Oh, it's a great matchup." And then obviously Luke started playing it and then realized. But like I think that was one that we could have, because that was in our hands as well to change. So.
Yeah,
I think we could have, playing it back, we could have got, a better matchup. But he did well to get points out of it. To be fair,
so he lost because of his overconfidence rather than because of his gameplay.
I was telling him the day before, I'm going to beat you, Toby. And then I put all my firepower into 10 horrors, and then realized the game is over when I only killed half.
Narrator. All right.
But we did. I could have played Darren, and we could have put Craig into Toby. That was probably the better matchup process.
Craig did well though, didn't he, against Darren? So.
Yeah, he got a point. So it was good.
Yeah, and I think for people who haven't played in a team event before, it's often not, often you're going to be put into a tough matchup, and it's not about you getting the win. It's about you getting the maximum amount of points you can get in that game. So you're still, you still keep the margin small enough that you score all your battle tactics or something like that. So team events are really cool. So if you haven't been to one, I would definitely recommend it. It's a lot of fun. So it's got that extra level of sort of tactics over singles events, but also it's just, I think, a lot of fun to play Warhammer like with your mates in that team atmosphere. So definitely recommend it. But yeah, so that's the Seraphon, and then we get on to
if we go just back on the Seraphon.
Oh yeah.
Geminids looks good on the list, but it did nothing for me at the tournament.
Sure.
So if I were to change the list, I would just literally swap Geminids and put 2 units of Guardian. Because the only problem with this list is I have no protection. So if somebody can reach the Slan and kill the Slan, then the game's over.
Sure.
Having 2 units of Guardian instead of Geminids was probably the better way to go. If I were to change the list after playing my games.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. But do you think? I guess you were talking about Geminids is good in that Gargant's matchup, but you never ended up playing the Gargant's matchup.
Yeah, it was just always better putting me into take Lumineth away from somebody or the other matchups that nobody really wanted that I could still. I think the problem with this list, even though it looks so strong, like Lumineth and Daughters are still so oppressive. That it's not a guaranteed win. You still got to just play it, which is great. That's the thing about the teams is you got to try and push these amber wins through.
Yes.
Normally in 4-man, you're going to get 1 green. If both teams do the pairing process really good, you'll get like 1 green for each. So they're going to get a win each. You'll get 1 red. And 2 ambers, and then just hope the ambers win their games. And if you do really well in that process, and you get obviously more greens for you, that just means you've done well. Yeah.
I think that's, and again, if you can get 5 points out of your red matchup when they get 0, then that's also about.
Adam's joined us. Love the Metabreakers. We're talking meta.
Oh yeah. Well, we did mention at the beginning, Adam. This is in case anyone was thinking that we just were hiding behind Metabreakers. In case we were like, oh, we don't play strong lists, but really we'd never win with them. So it's sort of just putting a stake in the ground before I go back to playing only Bundo, only Scragrot.
Walk forward and win, and drop down and get the double and win. That's Adam's. That's Adam's way.
So Owen Jackson, is asking.
That guy, I swear, that guy.
He's saying, can you drop the Slan down and bring the Sallies, or does the Slan have to start on the board?
The Slan has to start on the board. That's the problem. If you've not got the guard, then if he goes, then the army's gone.
That's what happened to in NashCon, the guy who played versus KO. I think it was Basil played versus KO. Gave the KO the first turn and then lost to Slam. So careful for that one. All right, and then
all the chosen ones are in the chat. Hey boys.
Meta takers. It's actually Metabreakers is actually short for Metabreakers Tribe, as in Meta Gatebreakers.
Like half of Team Wales in the chat, right? Well, they say they're from Wales, but
the bigger half of Team Wales.
We got 66% Gargant players in this chat right now.
Alrighty, speaking of Gargants. Alright, so we got this is the Sons of Behemat list. This is the list Fabian ran at Bloodtithe, and then I took 2 Onslaught. So it was it's got a 10-0 record. Maybe 15-0 after Dan plays it this weekend. And the list is pretty simple. You got 2 Gatebreakers, who are the high DPS Gargants, and 2 War Stompers, because they fit. You get 1 War Stomper who has Flaming Weapon and is a wizard, so you're sort of Flaming Weapon and Mystic Shielding. You've got the 1 Gatebreaker has a 5-up ward with the Amulet of Destiny, and the other one has the Enchanted Portcullis and Old and Gnarly, and what that does is a 6-up ward save and reroll saves of 1. So basically you have 2 extra tanky Gatebreakers who are also doing your damage, and 2 War Stompers who are hard to deal with because they're just Mega Gargants. So you got 2 hard to deal with Mega Gargants and 2 very hard to deal with Mega Gargants who also do a lot of damage. So one of the things I'm interested in, so Fabian, you can give us a rundown of your games from the weekend, but I'm interested mostly to hear about you went into the mirror. So a lot of people said they were like Taker Tribes auto wins the mirror, which was obviously not the case in your experience. So yeah, so well,
It was the 1-drop mirror as well, wasn't it? So...
yeah. So it was sort of Takers were like, oh, we can be the 1-drop and get on objectives first and just win. So why don't we start with that? So how did you feel going into the mirror, and how did it play out?
So the list was written by Mr. Morton up there. I can't take credit for this, obviously. And I want to, but I can't because he wrote it. But yeah, he wrote this for the mirror basically. We were focused on killing the Gargants, and obviously in this tournament you get an extra point for killing a monster. So we wanted to kill the Gargants rather than just go on to the objectives, as Adam tentatively said in his coverage, walk forward and put a toe on. We wanted this list to what's known in the community as a slap, basically. So we wanted it to, yes, Adam, walk forward, but also to be able to slap things off. So I played against the amazing Dan Ford, absolutely amazing match, great guy. I learned a lot actually from him as well, like just with literally having like empty bases to move your Gargants to, like correct measurements and stuff, and he was absolutely lovely as well throughout the whole match.
Yeah, he's an
really, really, really good. So to beat the mirror is literally, people are so obsessed by taking all the objectives. So we play the mission that you have like 3 objectives across the middle. I can't remember which one it exactly was, but
what are the hold 1, hold 2, hold more?
Predator, where you pick the three things that are predators basically. Yep. So so what he did is he put a Kraken Eater on one side to claim an objective, and then claim the other 2 objectives as well, if you see what I mean. But he left the Kraken Eater by itself. So I literally just pushed all 4 Gargants into that one Kraken Eater, killed it on the first turn, and then swept across the other 2 to go across his army, if you see what I mean. So the mirror, you can put like a War Stomper or a Gatebreaker up against a Kraken Eater, and a Kraken Eater doesn't really do much damage to it.
Yeah.
It can't kill the Gargants, whereas
it's not even comparable, the damage.
Yeah. Whereas the way that Luke wrote the list with the flaming sword on one of the War Stompers, it turns it into a Gatebreaker. So it has all of a sudden it has damage 3, it can have like, if you're up against like a couple of Gargants, you can have like 10 attacks, Mechanic Struggle, Finest Day, whatever. You can have, all of a sudden you're hitting on 2s, winning on 2s, -2, 3 damage. You're doing a lot of damage through to Gargants basically. So yeah, it kills the mirror like quite handily. And I also found that across the weekend it killed quite a lot of other stuff as well. So going into stuff like Thunder Lizards. Thunder Lizards were our first game. Normally, Gargants aren't great against Thunder Lizards because of the -1 damage, as you said earlier. So Kraken Eaters, for instance, they're damage 2. They suddenly go down to damage 1. So they're just the same damage as an Empire Swordsman.
As stabbers.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like goblins from your gits, like they're the same. Like, but having a Gatebreaker, which is damage 3 going down to damage 2, still slaps off. Big stabbers. Monsters and skinks and stuff. So. That went really well because I was Breaker Tribe basically.
As well, right?
Yeah, as you found, right? I mean, I don't want to say too much because I know you're going to go into it as well.
Oh yeah, I got loads of secret tactics coming up.
But yeah, the highlight for me was game 3 against Zinch, where again we tried to engineer Simon Weekly's. We tried to engineer the mirror again because we knew that the mirror was so good in my favor. And they did a smart thing by turning it down. Well, they actually we tried to goad them into it with a bit of banter. But his boy Daniil, he stepped up and
jumped on that grenade.
As we thought was going to fall on a sword to protect Simon, but it turned out the same thing as Luke. After the first turn, I thought I'm really over my head here. I'm like in a really bad matchup basically. Managed to pull out the win, and I think it was from the turn 1. He had Kairos Fate Weaver. He rolled a 10 for his Soul Screen Bridge, and then I rolled my dice, and I rolled a 6. I use Peter Pig dice. If anyone uses those out there, I rolled a 6, and then the other 6 landed flat on terrain, but we'd pre-agreed that we were going to re-roll anything that was not flat on the table. So if anyone's out there that plays tournaments, obviously knows about that. Dice. So I got asked by the table boss to roll it in the the little square for the camera, and then I just looked at Daniil, didn't even look at the dice, and hit him, straight in the face.
The power
So,
of positive mental attitude, man.
Yeah. So, and that was off a Gargant that wasn't even a wizard either. That was a heroic willpower gatebreaker. rolled an 11 over the 10, and Daniil's soul left his body, so he wasn't bothered about playing the game anymore. So
yeah,
that was the highlight from
the
my
early mental advantage, the early mental
I mean,
domination.
the guys as well. The guys in the chat as well, like Owen Jackson, Adam, and Mark, and everyone meeting those guys as well. That was pretty cool. Like getting hugs off those guys. That was pretty sweet.
Yeah, good to get the Warhammer hugs back on the go after a couple of years with that. That was for sure. I think, and I know we were talking about this, Fabian, but it's one of the things is like I played a lot of the host duplicitous change host, and that list was super strong, but because it did no damage, you were always sort of at the risk of your opponent just high rolling on one of the 5 turns with enough damage to kill your stuff and get you off an objective and you lose. And I think that's one of the things that Takers also suffers from. It's like you've got your Kraken Eaters on objectives, and that's fine. But if they do just have that crazy pop-off turn, and it could be any of the turns while you're trying to hold on, you can lose those games. Whereas I think with the Gatebreakers, whatever's trying to take you off an objective, you're also hitting hard enough that like they can't just they can't throw everything in and be like, okay, I'm just gonna fight you and try and kill you, because they're like, whatever I put in, there's a good chance it dies. And at the end of the day, killing stuff is just a very sort of successful way to win games. You remove units, and and the shooting. So each Gatebreaker has 1 shot, which is 3s and 2s, 3 rend, 4 damage, and that goes up to 2s and 2s because of this fierce loathing versus heroes and wizards. And that just really gives you the option of removing 4 wound heroes a lot. Like, so I was playing against Cities of Sigmar, and he had the 30 Iron Drakes and the Rune Lord, who gives them +1 rend. And so the first turn, I was like, okay, I'm just going to +1 to hit in the shooting phase and try and shoot off this Rune Lord. Unfortunately, 2s and 2s, obviously, first roll of the game is still a 1. Like, that's a given. That's a given. But we were both talking about it, and it's like you still go for it, because if you get through both of those shots, you kill the Rune Lord turn 1, and you've essentially ended the game. Because the way that Gargants work right now basically is you are on a clock from turn 1. They're going to be scoring a lot of points from battle tactics, because they're always getting that +1 for doing it with a monster. If it's available, they'll be getting it, and they're almost always going to have control of the objectives in whatever way they want. You might be scoring some objective points, but they also will be. So it's basically always a question of, can you kill the Gargants fast enough to score? And so if you are losing key buffs from a Gatebreaker shooting off a buff hero, you're just going to fall too far behind on that clock. And I'd say about half of my games, probably about half of my games, I was like, this game, if it was a 7-turn game, I think my opponent could have played differently and probably, successfully beaten it. Like I was playing versus Nagash, if he's sort of carefully just healing up, always keeping his defensive buffs up and killing 1 Gargant each turn with Nagash running around, I'm like, he could have won. But at the end of the day, it's a 5-turn game, and there are 4 Mega Gargants, and you've got to be not only killing them to get back into the game, you've probably got to do extra work, because you might not be scoring all your tactics with monsters.
So a couple of questions. We've got Mark Brooks is asking why didn't he 2+ with scribes?
Oh, yeah.
So Mark, I asked Daniil this, and he said that he didn't want to risk rolling the 1, and he felt more safer with Kairos rolling the 2 dice and then matching the highest over my just normal my normal dice basically. And we also have a question which for both of you, Luke and for JP, from James Dean. What's the best counter for Gargants? ? Good luck with this, boys. They seem impossible to beat unless you're playing Gargants also.
Also, bring more Gatebreakers. Yeah, and I think this leads us into the next thing, right? Like if we're talking about what the meta is right now and how you're going to think about breaking it, right? You have to be thinking about how do I beat Gargants, because not only are they very strong, they're very popular, right? And they're a rather unique army, I think, in that, like if you look at something like Change Host, you would not see sort of casual players who were playing for fun wouldn't play Change Host. A lot of people actually would be like, I knew there were people who had Zinch who wouldn't play Change Host because they're like, I don't want to offend my opponents. I don't sort of want to be that guy. Whereas Gargants, it might not be this list, but like lots of people want to play 4 Mega Gargants because it's super fun. They've been playing, they wanted to play it since 2.0. So you got to be looking at how to beat them. And I know we can go through a bunch of stuff that beats them, but I would say probably from the start, I don't think there is anything in the game that I would say is a hard counter to Gargants. I don't think there's a list right now in the game that you would say, oh, Gargants will never beat this. Gargants have a 10% win rate versus this list. I think they're strong enough that they will have a winning chance versus any army. It might depend on battle plans. It might depend on priority rolls, stuff like that. But I think
13 Stormbreaks.
30, yeah. Well, there is that. That's not quite on the table yet. But yeah, we can get into stuff that's.
Both Snakes and Gotrek should always beat Gargants.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's probably a good one. But I mean, even then, right? You can get a couple redeploys away from Gotrek and have that same issue of just not getting.
Gargants can't engage the Bow Snakes because they've got to get through Gotrek.
Bow Snakes don't even do any damage to Gargants. Not fast enough. I know there's differing opinions on this, but for me, I tend to avoid from trying to play shooting to counter Gargants because as opposed to melee damage, you're only shooting in your turn. I mean, you can unleash hell if they charge you, but often that keeps you a bit behind on the clock. But yeah,
the issue with the Gargants is, as Fabian will say, is everybody says they kill Gargants, and then you play the Gargants and you don't kill the Gargants, and then you instantly lose the game.
Yes. Yeah. So I think
all these lists that are built to beat Gargants, if they whiff at any point in the game, they lose.
So Owen's mentioned here double Maw Crusher, Nagash and Vordry, 20 Graveguard with Van Hells. They're probably all dead after the first pile in. Don't know if they get the second half of Van Hells, but and Gristlegore Terrorgeist. So
all in one list?
It's a very good list. I think it's probably actually a bit expensive, probably 2,500 points for all that. But I can talk about. So I played against OBR Nagash twice at Onslaught, and definitely Nagash was the best thing that I played against for killing Mega Gargants. He can get to them very easily. He can sort of abuse protection of a Nagash. And he gets those the arcane bolts, right? So he can be 6 or 7 arcane bolts charged up on him, and so he's doing between 14 and 20 mortal wounds. Before he starts hitting you, he's got high rend. Gargants on 1 wound, Gargants on 1 wound happen twice. So I think Nagash is good, and I can see a Nagash and Vordry list, extra pile-ins and an extra high damage unit.
Didn't Andy Hughes take a when in one of the. It was in one of the tournament or something. It was streamed, wasn't it? He took Vengorian Lord, Manfred, and then was it Nagash as well, Luke?
Yeah, he went with you, didn't he? He lost one game and then he played it again. And
then beat it, didn't he? Like really easy.
Gargants?
Yeah, it was Nagash, wasn't it? Yeah, so I think Nagash, Vengorian Lord, and Manfred can beat Gargants. I think with a good player playing it as well, someone like Owen Jackson maybe like playing that would
lose, but for
teleport the gas, charge in, do 27 damage, and then shake hands.
Shake hands. Again, like that's the thing is also, especially with this Gatebreaker list, right? You are scared of the backswing. Double Maw Crusher again, like you can. A part of it also is being fast enough, right? Because you do need to threaten the Gargants on turn 1. You want to be getting into them. And honestly, Flesh Eater Courts, they're not in a great spot overall, but.
I think the issue is if this breaker list becomes a thing, is the taker list, people can kill their Gargants.
Yes.
And they don't need to worry about the slapback. But the problem with this breaker list is that there's lots of lists that could kill 1 Mega Gargant, but the slapback from the other 3 it's just gonna do so much damage you can't kill any more of them, and then it's just over.
That's why
with a Gargant list that does damage back to you, then it's a big problem
Yeah.
because you just commit so much to killing one Gargant,
Yeah.
and
then
then
you get
the
slapped.
other X3 just come at you, and it's just not. It's just over.
That's why you need Gristlegore, where you kill 2 megas in one turn. That's the dream. You just slap them.
I do like Owen's point though when he's talking about like Leo. Leo was at Bloodtithe. Leo is a fantastic player as well.
Mhm.
And he went 5-0 with Nagash and Vordry. So there are lists out there that can do enough damage to kill these lists. But again, these were the lists that were with Kraken Eaters, that were 1-drop Kraken Eater lists that don't really have much protection. Whereas we'll go into your tournament, JP, what you found, because obviously you've not really spoke about how you won. Congratulations as well.
Yeah, we'll get into my very exciting game 5. Whoa, that one's crazy. That one, that's the one that's the like, comment, and subscribe game.
Yeah, but we're talking about this new version that we have really is as you see on the screen is how'd you beat this, JP? Like, let's just talk about your tournament first, right? And then maybe we'll talk about how to beat it. But
sure, yeah. I mean, my tournament. So I played my first 2 games were against OBR and Nagash. And I got slapped around. Both games I finished with 1 Mega Gargant alive and 3 Mega Gargants dead. But they were games that were quite close on the board, but you always have that buffer where you're like, okay, I've got 3 or 4 points left that I've gotten from doing something like broken ranks with Gargant or Savage Spearhead with a Gargant. So
you tabled both of those armies though, didn't you?
I didn't kill Nagash in the first one. I did 0 damage to Nagash, killed everything else, and then in the second game I did kill Nagash, but only because my opponent basically, he realized, he was like, I can't win unless I kill like 2 Gargants this turn. So he didn't bother with Mystic Shield. He just went all in on damage, and he killed the Gargant, one of the Gargants, didn't quite kill the other one, and then I just killed Nagash at the end because he had no defensive buffs. But if he had decided that he wanted to keep Nagash alive, he could have, kept Nagash alive instead of that play. Yeah, so killed everything except Nagash basically in those 2 games. And then in my third game, I played against 30 Blood Knights and Manfred and a White King. And that was the game where I really felt the power of the Gargants, where, my opponent, he got up in my face immediately, but because he's sort of MSU all these units of 5 Blood Knights, I was just able to sort of hit the unit that hadn't activated yet. And there are 3-up saves, so they're strong, and he can all out defense them. I think I failed a bunch of roars. But I was whittling them down, and so he killed 2 Gargants by the time I'd killed 20 Blood Knights, and then there were just 2 Gargants still left on full health versus 10 Blood Knights, and the objectives were still left. It was the battle plan where you can only burn your opponent's objectives. And basically, he got put in the awkward position of, he had to burn my objectives when he took them, because if he didn't, I could take them back, but I didn't have to burn his objectives. So it got to the end of the game and I had no objectives left, but I was on his objectives and holding them. So I could just say, okay, you can never take these back off me, so I'll score them and then burn them on my turn 5. And that really, again, is just because of the power of counting his 20 models. So
was it Soulblight you played?
It was Soulblight, yeah.
Soulblight, okay, yeah, sorry.
And he was doing a nice little play where he would charge Manfred in, roar me so I couldn't use all out defense, and then teleport Manfred away so he couldn't die. But I think this is gonna. Oh, and then I'll talk on this in a bit. And then my game 4.
That is interesting because Tom, the part of Team England, is the team captain. Yeah. He uses Soulblight, Blood Knight list, and I don't think he's lost to Gargants yet because
Does he have a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that adds.
You play 30. He has 25, and just because obviously I don't know if he's played the Breaker version yet. He's not. He's never mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
But just the War Stompers just being able to pick guys out of the middle.
Yes, and throw them for mortals. Yeah. I think it really also is the Gatebreaker thing, because if I'd played Kraken Eaters, I would have not killed enough Blood Knights. It would have gotten to the same stage in the game where I had 2 Gargants left, but he would have had, instead of only 10 Blood Knights, he would have had 20 Blood Knights left.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. This is what we're talking about, right?
and then he would have enough bodies to contest objectives and enough damage to kill the other megas. So
Yeah.
I think it really is about, again, you want to be killing stuff. My game 4 in the morning was versus cities, so 30 Iron Drakes, and 2 Frost Phoenixes, and then like Huracan and buffs. And that's a cool list. The Phoenixes, I think, because I know there's a version you can play with more Iron Drakes, but the Phoenixes really do because they've got a 4-up after save, and they've got they have various save stacking mechanics. I really was doing I was doing like 3 or 4 damage to a Phoenix per turn with a Gatebreaker, and so I was stuck. And that game, that really I think showcased maybe what's sort of wrong with Gargants. Turn 1, I moved onto the objectives, and then I moved 1 Gargant 4 inches. Oh, we've lost Luke. Then I used after that turn.
All we can see is the art of bin.
Yeah, the art of bin. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Luke. So yeah, after turn 1, moving on to objectives, I moved 1 Gargant 4 inches, and that was all I did for the whole game. I was tagged by Phoenixes, and my opponent was just rolling as many dice as he could to try and get through Gargants in time to win, and he didn't manage it. So it's sort of that was the epitome of. I say that was the epitome. Game 5 is the epitome of big brain gaming. Then my game 5 was versus Seraphon, but it was power in numbers. Oh yeah. Oh, and I'll talk about the kick in a second. Power in numbers, which is where you can just burn all the objectives. I won turn 2 priority. I ran the Gargant. I ran off my objectives onto my opponent's objectives, burned all the objectives at once, and it was over. It was a 15-minute game.
Oh geez, so, that's pretty good.
Yeah. So
that's pretty good.
So yeah, not much to say there. So a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to Carnage this weekend. There isn't many giants there. Oh, that's not quite nice. Okay, yeah, not much giant. That's a good way to beat them. Don't play against them. Do you feel like the Kraken Eater kick is a gimmick? Yeah, I do. So I played Bundo in my gifts list, and one of the reasons I was like kicking the objective might win me some games in some corner cases. But I think a big thing about the kick. So on lots of missions, the kick doesn't matter at all. The board is small enough, armies are fast enough that wherever it is, you can get to it. The ones where it does matter, it is an awful mission, that burning one. The ones where it does matter, where you're like, I'm going to kick it out of my home objective and it'll only count for 2. It's like the scenarios where your opponent has taken your home objective, and the difference between winning and losing is them scoring 2 versus 4 is tiny. I can't think of that's such an obscure corner case that it almost isn't even worth mentioning as a tactic. Like I'd always rather say I'm doing 50% more damage or more than like, okay, in these certain battle plans I can change the scoring by a little bit, because it doesn't change your game plan. The fact that it counts for 2 instead of 4, it's sort of a decent amount of insurance in a very close game, but I wouldn't. It wouldn't make me confident that I was going to win a game just because I'd kicked that objective out. And I don't think if I was playing against it, I wouldn't be like, oh no, what do I do now? I'd just be like, I've got the same problem in front of me, which is kill these 4 really tall guys. And I think
kicking was more powerful in Age of Sigmar too.
Yes.
Yes. Just because the missions like vocal points, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
You could abuse the scoring system and stuff.
And in 2.0 there were bigger blocks of infantry, right? People used to play blocks that could contest the Gargant on an objective. You could have 40 chain rafts, you could have 40 skinks, and we'll get into this sort of how the meta has changed, but those blocks of things, because of various reasons, don't exist anymore. So kicking the objective away from your opponent doesn't really matter as much. If they can, like, the answer to getting objectives from Gargants now is basically killing them. Whereas in 2.0 there was an option of outnumbering them.
And you always had Simon practice games say, "Oh, I've rolled focal points."
Oh yeah, it's there you go. Great practice game. Handshake practice. So I think an interesting thing. So I played against 4 Mega Gargants at my last tournament with my Gits list. It was only 1 Gatebreaker. So it was still reasonable damage list, though it wasn't as much damage. And I would say the reason I won is because I won the priority rolls I needed to win. But the thing I also did that some people didn't do against me, this is what I noticed when I was playing, is I put everything in. Like, it got to turn 2, and I was like, okay, I don't have enough models left in my army to ever take an objective back from you. So I need to kill these Mega Gargants. That's the only option. And I was like, that means I'm putting everything in. So I had Scragrot. You know, I had my 2 Shootas left over. I had my 2 Trogs that hadn't died. Like, everything in base to base with the Mega Guard. Like, you had to do every single point of damage you could do so that you can beat that clock. And I noticed, like, in the Cities game, my opponent left his screen of Tree Revenants to stop me charging the Iron Drakes. And he left a Mega Gargant on 1 wound. And then we were like, what would the Tree Revenants have done? And we rolled it out, and they would have done 2 damage, right? Which is enough to kill him. And it's like, you know, what if on his first turn he's also charging in, you know, the Huracanum? What if you are charging in your 30 Iron Drakes? You know, like, those aren't situations you necessarily want to be in. But if it's the difference between leaving a Mega Gargant on 10 wounds and no wounds, sometimes you just have to do it. So I would say a recommendation if you're playing against it, and this isn't the secret trick to always win the versus Gargant, but like, you do need to kill them. So put, like, if you roughly know the damage of your army, you can make smart decisions about it. But if it means putting your wizard into the Gargant, put your wizard into the Gargant. You know, because
you gotta go all in, is what you're saying. Definitely.
Yeah, you've just throw the kitchen sink at it. You know, charge in your your support, your Sludge Raker Beast when you're playing Cruel Boys, you know, your Shamans. Because also, again, the difference between a Gargant being left on 1 or 2 wounds and 0 wounds can be the game. You know, because that's the difference between you taking the objective a turn early, you getting slapped back, and all that stuff. And again, because they are 1 monster, you know, it's not easy for them to split their attacks. It's not like multi-charging a Death Star where they're going to get more attacks from you multi-charging. They're still probably going to put all their attacks into one thing. So yeah, I'd say, you know, you've got to go all in. Kitchen sink. Yeah, exactly. The mega smooth brains. So yeah, you got to engage your own smooth brain and just charge everything in and start doing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why stuff like when you do play a double Maw Crusher list, you know, Iron Draws are a good faction for everything in their army does damage. You know, you can have 1 Ardboy champion left from your unit and he can do 5 wounds. So yeah, again, anything that's going to help you meet that clock. And it also probably means you probably have to kill the closest Mega Gargant. You know, if you can't charge, you know, maybe you have to charge the one who has a 5-up ward save turn 1 because he's the only one that's there. But again, often it's going to be that it's that choice or nothing. And I think
you also need a bit of luck as well. Like any tournament you go to in game, you need a bit of luck. Like I played a practice game last night, and literally the Iron Drake champion who does D6 damage against monsters, he just rolled a double 6. Literally just did 12 damage to my Gargant. So I was just like, you know, just lost a War Stomper on turn 1 because the champions decided to roll double 6. So, you know, it can happen. Like, you know, if you get lucky and you believe it's going to happen, it will happen. You know, that's how I think. You know, but I personally, playing with them, I don't think they're unbeatable. Now, like, I'm only going to 2 more tournaments with them now, and then I'm going to be creating some lists, and I'm going to be beating these guys on a regular, like, no problems. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know them inside out. So, I think they are beatable. I don't think that people need to have an absolute despair about, like, oh, I can't beat them, so on and so forth. Like, you know, like, we're talking about Nagash, we're talking about Soul Blight has got a game against him. We're talking about Marathi. The little ginger ninja Gotrex is just amazing at killing them, no problem. So, you know, there's various things that everyone can do. You know, various tournaments are now ruling that Knights of the Empty Throne, for instance, Luke's love can you know, stop Gargants from scoring altogether. You know, X, Y, and Z. So I think there's something for every faction. I think that there's a list that you can build, and I think people just need to adjust. That's all it is, instead of just being in this.
Adjust to the meta. That's as more books come out and the armies just shift, don't they? If you get too hard done down, you just got to adapt, haven't you? Like what Fabian's saying, it's always been the case in 6th, 7th, 8th edition, AOS when it first came
There's
out.
always something.
It's changing, isn't it?
I think this is a nice tie-in to, if we're going to look at stuff between changes from second edition to third edition. I think one of the things that I've felt is, with the point squish and buffs to heroes and monsters and stuff, I definitely feel like third edition is the edition of, like, just only bring good units. Like, I used to play Legion of Grief, where the whole thing was like, okay, I had Direwolves and a unit of 10 Chain Rasps and a unit of 5 Black Knights, and you had a lot of utility units. Whereas now I feel like you can't afford as much of that, and in tying in with adapting to beat Gargants, it's like you want everything in your list to be powerful. More. So I feel like chaff is less useful because you can't get enough of it, and you're not contesting objectives in the same way. And so I feel like tying in with throwing the kitchen sink at them, have a good kitchen sink of a list where you've got a lot of stuff that does slap. And again, because you are probably, this is probably the most popular like top faction we've ever seen in AOS, right? I don't think Zinch or Seraphon, Slanesh, any of these things were as popular as Sons of Behemat are going to be. And so it's a good consideration if you're looking at your list and you're like, oh, do I want this which is a bit more utility or this which is a bit more damage? For me, I'm always going to be leaning on that side of more damage, because that just feels to me a bit more about what this edition is like. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you guys thought about. So Luke, you can go first about what you think the differences in the meta are from playing, end of second edition to start of third edition.
Well, it was weird, wasn't it? Because you had 2019 to 20 where you kind of saw proper tournaments.
Yeah.
COVID come, didn't it? And then that kind of 2020 handbook didn't really do anything apart from tabletop simulator kind of tournaments. But it's definitely a different game. I think being lower drop is way more powerful now than it has ever been. I wasn't really fussed about being low drops in second edition. I just feel that there's so many armies now that can do so much damage on the double. It really is over. So even if you screen well and you get through the screen on the first turn, then you're getting into the good stuff.
Yeah, because again, those screens are smaller, right?
Now. Before you could kind of screen really far away, hold things back, let them double you, and then you're back on the double if you took a really high drop list. But I just feel now you either go really, really super tanky, like Knights of the Empty Throne can get a hit. All these God heroes can all take a hit. Definitely Slaves of Darkness with Mark Zinch, so you can definitely build lists that don't really care about the double. But a lot of other armies just don't want to be doubled. So you can see in people trying to go as low drop as they can.
Yeah,
more
makes
than
sense.
Because the access to it as well. Everybody can be can be one drop.
And it makes it more of a drops war. If you can be low, you got to be really low. So we've got a question from Grey Seer. What if you're an inherently chaff or horde army like Skaven and Gitz? I played Gitz at my tournament before this. I played a lot of Gitz in third edition, and I've just moved away from playing chaff. So my Gitz list was 1 unit of squigs, 2 units of minimum size squigs, 2 units of minimum size shooters for my battle line, and then I took a Mega Gargant, I took a Spider, I took a Mangler Trog, I took Scragrot, and I took 3 Trog. So I basically just moved away from that Gitz horde level army. I think in some ways, one of the things about Skaven and Gitz is you can still get blocks of 60 chaff, which is actually like big enough to stop a Mega Gargant for a whole turn, whereas other armies often have gotten smaller. So like you can't have 40 Chain Rasps anymore, you can only have 30, whereas Gitz still can go up to 60. So I think you can probably build for those 2 specific armies. You can probably still have those blocks of 60, and they are a roadblock, but it's
the problem is those big blocks. You're smart and you actually do split your fire now. But before, you didn't want to split your fire because everybody just could be immune to battle shot basically. But now you say there's like 3 big blocks or 2 big blocks. Just hit both of the big blocks, and one of them's going to die to bravery.
Well, but Skaven and Gitz do both have immunities, right? With the moon and with bells. But yeah, I agree. It's hard with those blocks because damage has gone up a lot in this edition, especially damage pounds per square inch, right? Because of the monster damage, right? Because so much damage comes from monsters and heroes now, that you can't rely on corner tagging someone with 60 Gitz. You used to be Yeah, exactly. Take 4 lightning cannons and don't be afraid. You used to be able to say, okay, I got my gits and I've corner tagged your Death Star. You know, your 20 Hearthguard Berserker, they're tagged on the corner. Now, if you tag Archeon anywhere on his base, he's doing his full damage into your block of 60 grots, which is a lot. Same thing if you're tagging a Mega Guardian, it's doing his full damage. So I would say those horde units are weaker. I think you can still play it. When I was playing Gits, I looked at a block of 60. I played that into Dock and had actually reasonable, like in the meta, Hagnar, Marathi, Litz, and you could definitely give them a run for their money with that block of 60 because it is hard to get through. But you know, I think it's definitely worth a look. And I had a lot of fun playing the Gits Monster Mash army or the Skate. Yeah, and I haven't played Skaven, but I'm sure you can play, you know, Skaven. You can play Thanquol. You can play HPAs. And that doesn't mean your battle line isn't still 3 units of 20 clan rats, but I
think zombies can go horde and not care.
Yeah.
Especially when they regenerate, or they grow up the Titan strength as well. So you can't even chaff them up because that's what they love. They go in and kill the chaff and
get bigger. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
A bit of an insight now. Oh, earthquake. No, it went. It's just my desk. I'm gonna give you a bit of an insight now. I actually disagree with Luke in regards to the drops. He's correct in what he's saying, but just the way my mind works. So just to let you in my mind. So I prefer being high drops because I like to see where my opponent goes. So if I'm playing against a 1-drop army, and you know, they win the dice roll, for instance, and I'm like 4 or 5 drops or 9 drops, whatever, I can put a unit right in the middle of the board in my deployment zone, and then I can see where the whole army is deployed.
I love that as well. I love that change that you have to drop.
Yeah.
The whole. So for people who maybe don't know, in 3rd edition, if you are lower drops, you have to drop you can't split them. You have to drop that whole drop at once.
Yeah. So for me now, tactically, I love it. I love playing against 1-drop armies because I get to see where they deploy, how aggressive they're going to be, where the characters are, where I can be reactive or I'm going to be proactive, or if I can outflank them, or if I can pincer them. Do you know what I mean? There's so many things that go across my mind while they're deploying, and I think my game 5 against the Orc player I played against, he was a lower drop and he deployed his army and I got to see where he put certain things, and I actually trapped his Gore Grunters in a corner because of that. So I love playing against 1-drop armies just purely because of that. And Luke is right, because some 1-drop armies are designed to be 1-drop. So they they'll go down, they'll give you the first turn, and then they'll go in and punch and then go for the double and then the game's over, right? But for me, it's a real tactical brain that you know, I kind of see that, and I kind of see where they go in. You can kind of see that coming, really, if you you know you measure it out and do what you need to do. But yeah, I think being higher drop for me anyway. I think I write my list to be higher drop because I like to see where my opponent's going to put their most important pieces. But that's just an argument from the other side.
Yeah,
but like I'm saying, I'm not saying Luke's wrong. I just disagree in the different thinking.
I think both of you are right in that. I think also there's a thing to mention, which is that in 2nd edition, it used to be very bad to get given first when you had no turn 1 threat, right? You would sort of have to just sort of shuffle forward, be sad about it, and then maybe get slapped on a double. Now going first, there are battle tactics, you know, run 3 units first, just advance, which you can sort of score for free, and you can max score objectives, and everyone's closer together, so a lot of the times you can be like, well, my turn 1 threat range is online. So I think in that respect, drops is a little less important because going first isn't so bad. But I think what I think there's also a thing, and we've talked about this before, is that being low drops also means you have to make the decision and be able to take advantage of it, right? So let's say you're playing a list where you're low drops and you're like, I know that if I can make you go first and if I get the double, I win. You've got to deploy to have advantage of that and to make up for them scoring early, and you have to be ready to capitalize on getting the double without losing if you don't get the double. And that can be more difficult than, say, just being high drops, looking where your opponent deploys and saying, okay, I'm safe, you know, I'm ready. Yeah. So I think it's like, for me, I like being high drops as well, like Fabian does. But a big part of that is I'm like, I get to play in that reactive manner. My opponent has to make a bunch of tough choices in how they're gonna, force, try and predict the game, and I can just be like, well, I'm set up so that I'm happy either way, and that can be an easier position. And it sort of means if they're not razor sharp in all their decisions, they've thrown away their advantage and given me the deployment advantage. So maybe, and in some, I would say on some battle plans it doesn't even matter. Like in some missions you're going to play and there's not a huge advantage to either player for getting the double. Like if you're just melee versus melee, and they can be like, well, I gave you first turn, you scored, and then I didn't get the double, or I couldn't capitalize on the double because I couldn't go all in enough at the end of turn 1. And again, it's a powerful tool. I agree with Luke. It's very powerful, and armies are so powerful now that you can leverage that better. But it's not as much of an I win button as it was in 2, unless you're a top player on top of those decisions and using that to a maximum effect.
Yeah, I think you need to write your list to be a 1-drop.
Yes.
I don't think you just make your list and then go, oh, I'm going to put it in that
battalion. Exactly.
You see what I mean?
With my Gits list, I'd written the list and I was like, okay, I have enough units that I could just lower my drops from 11 to 6. And then I was like, actually, I would rather, and I forget what it was. I just took some other battalion because I was like, I'd rather be, if I'm not going to be a 1-drop, I would rather be 11 drops than 6 drops, so that I always see everything my opponent's deployed. And I played against people who were like, I'm a 5-drop, who had just done that, and all it meant was they had to deploy a bunch of their army at once, and I didn't. So they'd have deployed their whole army, and all I've deployed is Scragrot next to the Loon Shrine and some Squigs. And I'd be like, okay, this gives me the advantage. So I would say that drops are very powerful, definitely. But yes, that's a good point, Owen. But you should think about how you're going to use it. And Owen Jackson's pointed out that because a lot of abilities now can be used in your own turn, Finest Hour, All Out Defense, stuff like that, it's harder to get caught with your pants down. In 2.0, you could put Archeon, big lad, good save, out in the middle of the open. And if you lost priority, he could just die, right? And it doesn't, not even to a Death Star, right? Like, I killed him with 12 Miramor and Banshees. He could die to normal stuff because he was just a 3-up save. Now, if you're sort of out of position and caught out, they've gone through a screen, he can be on a 2-up rerunning ones. But again, that's going to depend on your list. As Luke said, if he, because his list, he didn't have a lot of screens. He has a slan just out there. If he's losing priority at the wrong time or can't control drops in the correct way, he's going to lose his slan. It's just going to die, and the game's going to fall apart after that. So I think it's a very powerful, and again, with the new power level, it can be increasingly important. But as Fabian said, you don't just slap your list to lower drops because you can. So just think about how you're going to use your drops and how you would use deployment and stuff to your advantage.
And the other thing to notice is exciting times, because literally it's not been out that very long, and there's so many armies that are winning.
Mm-hmm. Like, absolutely.
More than ever.
Yeah.
You got Slanish won a tournament the other day, Beastman Podium the other day. You got Nighthawk going 4-1.
Mm.
All these armies that you just it just makes you think, like, we know what's top. We think we know what's top tier, but because of the game and the way it is, you're always in it to win it still, even regardless of what.
Absolutely, and that's sort of the point of Metabreak. I think that's a really interesting point as well, because I remember when the edition started, everyone was like, "Yo, how do you deal with Gotrek? Like, he's so oppressive." Then we saw the first tournaments come out, and Gotrek really didn't gain a lot of traction. Wasn't having that success, and now we're seeing, okay, well, Mega Gargants are becoming so popular. We're talking about, okay, well, what about City's list? What do you add Gotrek back in? And so it just shows what Luke said, which is we are right, we're still in the fresh melting pot of the meta, and we got, Storm Drake Guard, those dragons, the Stormcast dragons are going to come out, Cruel Boys are going to start hitting the table. So in terms of meta breaking, right, now is definitely the time. Like, we still don't know what the best stuff is. We don't know what's best for beating Mega Gargants, Maybe it is Flesh Eater Courts. Maybe you do start seeing Flesh Eater Courts run for this because people have dropped other stuff. Because it's not good against Gargants.
It's like boxes, for instance. Dan was just jumping around. He's like, I got the best list in the game, and like a good friend of ours, Dan. Yeah. And it's just like it looks so good on paper, but when you actually start seeing the foxes being played and at tournaments, they're not the same level. They're not that good. And like Jack, is probably one of the best players in the country, and he was struggling. Like every game is like, I'm gonna lose. Me and Fabian were like, we're gonna have to push.
Yeah.
I mean, just because of his experience, it was just good to see like a player like that. He won because he stayed in his game every time. But the list. That list looks so strong on paper, but it's really not that strong.
Yeah, and again, like, there, now is also going to be the time that everybody is playing matchups they've never played before, right? When you go to a tournament and you play against Nighthaunt, you are probably one of the first. You're like, I've never played against Nighthaunt in 3rd edition. What's that like? And so, again, also if you're a player and you're like, oh, I've got this idea for a new list that I've never tried, now is like the best time to do it, because everyone's learning the edition, and you can come in with this list. We talk about this almost every Metabreakers episode, but you come in with your new list. You're expecting to play against Gargants. You practice against Gargants. The Gargants player comes in and they're like, oh, I'm just expecting to win, and I've never played versus Nighthaunt, And you're like, okay, well, actually, I know from practice that I can hold up with my unit of 20 chain rasps a Mega Gargant because I'm immune to rend, So you're like, okay, every one of his attacks has 3 rend. For me, that's nothing. If I'm making my saves on my 4 up or my 5 up, I'm just laughing, And so you're like, oh, I've practiced the Mega Gargant matchup, and he never has. So again, that's what Bill Souza was saying with his Hedonites of Slanesh list that he won the event with. He was like, I just saw the discussion where it was like, look, this is the sort of list that often only will beat a player once. They see it the first time and they're like, I don't know why are there cockatrices? And then then he's summoning and he's doing this and that, and they're like, oh, I see it, but it's too late. He's already won. So again, if you want to, in terms of meta breaking, now is the time to bust stuff out. And I think, tie it together. If we're talking about, what about the meta, it's like, be aware of Mega Gargants, be aware that there's more shooting, be aware that there's less chaff, and just build that into your thought. Again, that can be your decisions. If you're thinking, I don't know which of these 2 units to build into my list, maybe the answer is the one that's better against Gargants, because why not? They're popular.
I think so.
But yeah, I think it's a great time to get into meta breaking and try out new lists and try out new strategies and, kill a Gargant per turn. That's the dream. That's the just shoot the heroes. That's the just shoot the heroes of 3.0.
I think we will do the tier list, but we just need we just need to see a few more results, don't we? Maybe another month, and then go. Just obviously, people who want to do the Metabreakers Masters, they're going to need to know what the tier list is. And
I mean, obviously, there are always, there's always a reasonable, if you're out there going 4-1 with Beast of Chaos, you're scoring Metabreakers points. That's a given. I don't think they're jumping up to S tier, but we'll have a more official tier list there later. But anyways, get on to the Metabreaker stuff. And bust out new filth. Kill a Gargant a turn, and hopefully beat Fabian at whatever tournaments he's bringing the Gargants to. Knock him down a peg. God knows. It's terrible, him just winning everything in 3. I'm certainly tired of it. Oh, God, here we go.
Too heavy, man. It's too heavy. Sorry, boys. Oh, jeez. Oh.
Can we cut the...
end it there now.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks for me.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
And remember, like, comment, subscribe, ask any questions in the chat, and a huge shout out to all our Patreons who make this sort of thing possible. They don't make the Mega Gargant list possible. That's totally not their fault. Thanks, everybody.
This video is made possible by our patrons. If you want to know more about how to support us, click on the link to the right.